Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Football League, a weekly podcast. Hello and welcome to the Football League Weekly, a weekly podcast looking into everything happening in the world of the Football League. And this week we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Robert from the Kidder Street Noise. First of all, quickly tell people where they can find your podcast and how often do you go live?
So my name is Robert. I'm part of a brother duo that present the Kidder Street Noise podcast. You can find our YouTube channel at YouTube Kidder Street Noise. The audio version of the podcast is now on the brfcs.com podcast titled The 4,000 Holes Show, where they have like multiple shows during the week. We talk like finances of Blackburn Rovers. We have like the round table show and mine and Lewis's Kidder Street Noise show as well. You can also find us on TikTok. We started uploading on there as well. If you search for Kidder Street Noise on there, you can find plenty of content on both our YouTube and our TikTok and our Twitter social media as well, which you can see the handle on the stream as well.
So, first of all, before we go into some of the news happening at the moment in the Championship, how has it been? And this is going to be a really vague question here, but what has it been like supporting Blackburn Rovers in the last couple of years? Because you always seem to finish quite well in the table. You're fifth in the playoffs at the moment in the Championship. So we'll discuss what is happening at the moment with John Eustace in a little bit. But what is it like in general supporting Blackburn Rovers at the moment?
What's it like supporting Blackburn? I mean, me and my brother always joke like it's the banter years of Blackburn Rovers. We always seem to be the team that nearly got there. You mentioned that we always seem to like finish well in the table, but we always seem to start well. We have a really good pre-Christmas season, and everyone's buzzing, and we're up there. We have a tricky time around Christmas, and then we seem to get this daunting feeling of disaster every single January, and usually it is a terrible window. The one recently is okay. People started getting excited about it, but I think it's more to do with the fact that the previous ones have been really bad. So this one looks quite good in comparison. But yeah, it's usually this part of the season that we really struggle with. We're fifth at the minute. The Championship's so tight. We could finish 14th. No one really knows. Good result last night. Everyone seems to be quite positive considering the situation that's happened last week, which I'm sure we'll get on to. But yeah, it's just too tough to know. I think, I expected us to be in the relegation zone this season. Every prediction show I did at the start of the season, I put us 23rd. I was like, this is the year. We lost Smodic. We concede too many goals. We're going down. And I've been pleasantly surprised by the season so far, but I am still very aware that this is Blackburn Rovers, and if we finish 16th, I wouldn't be very surprised at all.
So we'll talk more about Blackburn in a little bit, but let's talk about what is happening in the world of football at the moment. And the FA Cup was last weekend, and there were plenty of absolutely incredible results. Plymouth Argyle beating Liverpool, for example. Exeter City taking Nottingham Forest to penalties. But some news that broke out this week was that VAR will be trialled in the fifth round of the FA Cup and will be used in 7 matches at Premier League stadiums. So what do you make of this? Because there is the argument to be made that this has perhaps been introduced a little late into the competition.
Yeah, I think it's very unfair that some teams obviously get it. There's a lot of teams that would have benefited from it in the last round or the third round, especially like we had a goal disallowed, which had we had VAR, could it have been allowed? It was hard to see from the angle. We also had a penalty not given, which on another day, if VAR looks at it in slow motion for 5 minutes, could they give a penalty? Maybe. I'm not in favour of VAR at all, so I don't think it should be included in any competition. I think it can be improved if they're going to keep it, but I think I know this is going to be very conspiracy theorist of me, so like put the tinfoil hats on. But I think in the fourth round, there were a lot of bad decisions and decisions that like you can't even explain how bad they were. And it was almost like, look how bad we are without VAR. Look how much we need VAR, because it was almost like to quieten people down that were like VAR is rubbish. Like we can't keep doing VAR like this. Whereas they had one weekend without it, and there was so many decisions that were talked about that everyone was like, "Yeah, we need to keep VAR because we can't trust these officials." So yeah, I feel like introducing it at this stage is unfair because people are missing out. The draw was almost very like it's almost like set up for the Man United, Man City, Newcastle, Villa semi-final. I think that's the route they're trying to get down. A lot of obviously all four of those teams are drawn at home to what you would class as weaker opposition. And yeah, I just think it's very favourable to certain teams, and yeah, it's hard to obviously prove that, but it's hard to see past it as well sometimes.
And of course, semi-automated offsides will be introduced for the first time as well. The issue that I have with it is that the FA aren't consistent enough in regards to when they introduce these things or not. So do you reckon more consistency needs to be had if we are going to use the AR and the automated offsides in all of these competitions?
Yeah, definitely. It should be. If you start the first round without it, that's it. That's you done. Like it doesn't come in until the season after. I don't think there's any other sport that would introduce a new rule like halfway through a season. I'm trying to think like NBA and NFL always wait till at least like the new season or like especially once like the regular season's finished, going into the playoffs kind of thing, they might introduce a new rule then. But it's never like halfway through a competition or halfway through a season. It's just like, yeah, we'll introduce this. We'll trial this. Like the semi-automated offsides obviously worked brilliantly in the Champions League and the World Cup when they had it. But it's like the language around it, like we'll trial it. And it's like, well, you can't really be trialing stuff when you are 1 or 2 wins away from Wembley, because if it lets one team down, like letting a team down, I'm trying to think of the people who are left in the. I mean, Ipswich is a great example. Always having like a really tough season in the Premier League, but to get to an FA Cup semi-final, potentially a final, and maybe even win it. I know it's like I'm talking like way ahead of you, so I'm not trying to get you too excited. But that would be a massive achievement for Ipswich, and that'd be an amazing season. And if that were to be taken away because they trialled something and it went wrong, you'd never forgive them or never like you probably never get over it. So I just think it's a very dangerous thing to trial.
Yeah, and of course, like if that happened to Plymouth Argyle, for example, because they play Man City in the next round of the FA Cup, imagine how gutted they would be. So yeah, I think there definitely needs to be more consistency in regards to whether they use it or not. But a massive talking point that is the main topic of the show is obviously John Eustace going to Derby County. So to begin with, when the news first broke out, I don't think many people thought it was actually going to happen. But when the news first broke out, what were you thinking? Did you actually think he would move there?
I didn't think he would move to Derby County. The the first inclination I got that he was going to leave Blackburn Rovers was his first interview after or around the time like Arne Sigurdsson was being deregistered or not being included in the registration squad for the second half of the season. He mentioned something at the transfer deadline day about the club have been trying really hard to get their targets, and he's spent like the last 12 months saying that we need to stick together, we're like a family, we need all the club together, like working, pushing in the same direction. And that was the first bit of language he used where he was almost like trying to separate himself from like the actual what were going on at the club. And that's not been like him. And as soon as like we had it with Yondal Thomason last season, where at the end of the January transfer window last season, he wasn't allowed to speak to the press. And then the first time he got to speak to the press, he just kept saying, ask Greg, who was the director of football at the time. And as soon as that happened, we knew it was over for Yondal Thomason. it was the exact same when he mentioned the club are trying really hard to get their targets. It was like, oh no, here we go again. This is going to happen again just because we've been through it before. And yeah, since then he's just his body language hasn't looked right. Those things he was saying in the press just didn't sit right. And you knew something was going to go wrong, and it's just been the same old story for Rovers really. And I'm not surprised that he's gone. I thought he would have waited out for a better job because I feel like the position we were in could have attracted like a top half championship team or like potentially like a playoff promoting rival. But yeah, it's a big risk he's taken, and I don't think he would risk that so quickly.
Yeah, and especially with where Derby County are at the moment, because under Paul Warne, obviously they weren't doing very well at the moment, and they're in the relegation zone. So, do you reckon, because Derby County is obviously a long-term project, do you reckon he always had aspirations to manage Derby County, a club who he used to play for, or do you reckon he, if I can say this, jumped ship at the earliest opportunity?
I mean, he's always spoke about wanting to build something and wanting to be in it for like the project, and I could see that at Birmingham when he spent the summer there. He bought like 10 players, spent quite a lot of money. All the players were like, I think the average age was like 24. The oldest player was 28, and even though he got sacked in like a really good position at Birmingham, you could see that he was trying to build a squad in his image and like the way he wanted to play. At Rovers, he didn't really get that, and like he's signing players that, like, I mean, Danny Bath's been amazing for us this season, probably one of our better players. But 2 years ago, Jon Dahl Tomasson tried to sign him, and the owners told him no because they didn't want to offer long-term contracts to players of his age. And fast forward 2 years, we've just offered him a 1-year deal to sign him. So could you not have offered him a 3-year deal 2 years ago? And then Adam Forshaw came in the window. And I know it's like short-term depth and experience and stuff, but there also has to be the other side of that. There just seems to be no balance. It seemed like everyone that was coming in was very short-term. He's spoken a lot about contracts. A lot of his, you mentioned in the pre-show about a lot of players on Instagram leaving like long messages to him and thanking him and stuff like that. A lot of those players are out of contract in the summer or going into the final year. I can imagine that he'd run if he had the vision of a long-term project at Rovers. He'd have been saying, "I need Lewis Travis, I need Tyrese Dolan, I need Ryan Hedges for the next 3, 4, 5 years," and the club aren't willing to do it. So whether he's had those conversations in private and they've said no, whether he's had other conversations and they've said no, and he's just like, "No, that's me done." There's not really that many long-term projects I can see in the Championship. Just looking through the table, Derby could be one, but he needs to get the next 14 games right for it ever to turn into a long-term project.
Which is the perfect transition for John Eustace's first interview as Derby head coach. He said in an interview that they have 14 cup finals left, and this is in regards to where Derby County are and the rest of the games that they have in the season. And when talking about Blackburn's win last night over West Brom, he said, "I was buzzing, they won last night. It was a fantastic result, and I really hope Blackburn get promoted." So quickly before we move on to your ownership, because I'd quite like to talk about Venky's as well. What is the general feeling around John Eustace in the Blackburn fan base? Do a lot of fans respect his decision to leave the club, or do some of the fans feel a little bit betrayed by it?
I'd say a lot of the fans feel betrayed. I don't think that's because of where he's going to and the time he's done it. I think it's just because of the words he's used whilst he's been here. I think his attitude of that, having that togetherness, creating a family at the club, and like all the players and fans and the staff being together, and then to like jump ship at this time of the season, I think that's what leaves a bit of taste. And when he came in last season, it was just after Yondell Thomason left, and there was a lot of negativity around the ownership, the board, and the club in general. And he was the one that said, we need to stick together. We need to all push in one direction to stay up, which is fine. He wants the best for his players and he wants the best for himself. So that makes sense. But a lot of people felt like he was deflecting away from the ownership in the boardroom, which he's probably employed to do. So that's fine. But again, if you're constantly portraying that message and getting it out there, you can't then just pack your bags and go. But again, he's not been backed by the people above him, so he probably doesn't feel that togetherness. It's a really difficult one. Some people feel betrayed. I don't necessarily respect it, but I can understand why he's done it. I think anyone, in every job that you've ever been in, if it's unstable or you can't see the next 6 months, everyone really wants a 3-year, 5-year plan where they can see where they're going to be in that time. Are they improving? Are they getting extra benefits, extra training, that sort of thing? You can't see past the next month at Blackburn Rovers. So why would he want to stay there? If he was to fully commit to Blackburn Rovers, he's putting all his eggs in a very loose basket, and it only I think we had 2 wins in 12 before last night. If you lose 3 more games, there's no reason why they wouldn't sack you. So I think he's done the right thing for himself, which I can respect. The words he's used previously and the way it's happened, I don't respect.
So let's talk about Venky's, because there is a significant disconnect between the ownership and the fan base. According to a news article I was reading during my research, Venky's have not attended a single match in over a decade, which, if true, is absolutely abysmal, because you at least want your owner to show up at least twice a season, a bit like the Ipswich owners do. But how poor have they been? And assuming that they aren't in this country, do you reckon the lack of communication between Eustace and Venky's might have had a little bit of a role in him leaving?
When you hear other clubs say it and other people say it, it just sounds so baffling. But I think a lot of people are just used to it now. It's been 13 years. I think January 2012 was the last time they were at Ewood, and one of the owners got hit by a snowball by one of the fans, and since then we've had nothing from them. Yeah, communication. Can you really use that as an excuse? Because for people that work remotely, obviously we're doing this. We live nowhere near each other. Could he not have a Zoom call every week and just check in and have a 1-to-1 and say, how am I doing? Are there any updates on this? That's what a good ownership or a good management would do. They've hired certain people to run the club in their absence who aren't really Blackburn people and don't really understand the ins and outs of the town and the club and the fan base, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm in the mindset of that we need to protest soon before the long-term future of the club is in doubt. But when you're 5th in the table, when you do start protesting, other clubs and other media sources are a bit like, well, you can't really be protesting, you're in the playoffs. But it's not the on-the-field performance we're worried about, it's everything off the field, which a lot more people should be worried about.
And of course, a couple of years ago, Blackburn fans they basically protested by throwing tennis balls onto the pitch. Can you ever see a realistic scenario? Because we had a Reading fan on earlier this season who struggled to see a scenario where their owner would ever sell the club. So can you ever see Venky's selling Blackburn, or do you reckon that is something that won't come in the next couple of years?
The tennis ball protest was actually our idea. It was actually something that we thought of and influenced, and it did happen. And a lot of people said it was embarrassing. It wasn't that many tennis balls and stuff, but it stopped the game. BBC spoke about it for a couple of minutes. That's all you can hope for a protest. No one gets hurt, and some attention is actually put onto what it is you're actually doing. A lot of people say do it before or after the game. No one really like as soon as the game's finished on TV, most people turn it off unless it's Super Sunday and you're watching Roy Keane and Micah Richards go at it or whatever. But most people that are watching football will just shut it off as soon as the final whistle goes. Can I see Venky selling? I really want to say yeah, because everyone wants to have that hope and belief that eventually they will go. At the minute, they can't put any money in, or well, I don't know whether they can or they won't, but it's either going to be they sell or administration if it carries on the way it is, because at the minute we're selling players to keep, like to pay the bills. Eventually we're going to run out of good enough players to sell, which could be sooner rather than later. We're not renewing contracts, so as soon as people are in the final year, especially like the new Bosman ruling and stuff, after 6 months you can start speaking to them and whatnot. So we don't have anyone that's worth anything where a club wouldn't wait till they've run out of contract in a year and buy them anyway. A lot of players now probably haven't had a new contract for 3 years. They'll probably want a pay rise. We can't offer it them. So who's going to be here in 2 years' time? It's going to be either relegation, administration, or they sell. Whatever comes first, I have no idea. But yeah, it's worrying times, or it should be worrying times for a lot of Blackburn Rovers fans.
Do you reckon? Because I've asked quite a few fans this on the show in the past, simply because of where their football clubs have been. And again, we're talking about the likes of Reading. Do you reckon the FA should take more responsibility for where clubs like Blackburn and, as I just mentioned, Reading are? Because in the perfect world, they would step in and do something about these obviously incompetent owners coming into these football clubs.
I mean, if the FA were going to step in, I think they'd have done it a while ago. I actually did a bit of research into like the Championship revenue the other day, because people were talking about like the Venky's put in around £20 million a year. They don't. That's our operating losses most years. That's £20 million. But in the last 4 years, out of all 24 teams that are in the Championship this season, so like that's include teams that have been in the Premier League. Do you know how many teams have made profit in those years? In 1 year, it's like in one season, how many teams have made profit?
I don't know, because when Ipswich were in the Championship, like our losses were quite large actually. So maybe two, like maybe the top teams in the Championship, like Sunderland, maybe Leeds.
No, Sunderland lose around £10 million a year. Leeds lost 36 and 33 million over the last 2 years. Even in the Premier League, they lost 12 million. So out of all the previous 4 seasons for all 24 teams, only 11 seasons clubs made a profit, which is worrying. You look at teams like Stoke City that have lost 85 million in the last 4 seasons and they're still struggling. Bristol City have lost like best part of 70 million, and they finish mid-table every season. So it's really like the warning signs are all there that football is eventually going to come to a collapse and that we can't carry on like this. But still, because the prize of getting to the Premier League is worth so much, they just allow clubs to take that risk forever and ever and ever. And I don't know what's going to come first. Will it be the EFL and FA putting in wage caps so that people don't lose as much money, or will it be, I don't know, because they can't just give people more parachute money or the EFL more money, because they'll end up just spending it anyway and keep having operating losses.
And you'll have teams, because I'm reading at the moment as we're talking, there are teams who've tried to be promoted in the past, like QPR, who after they went back down to the Championship kind of plummeted. Luton Town, at the moment, they're struggling in the Championship, and if they went down to League One, then financially, despite Sky Sports airing a lot more League One and Championship games, it's going to be very difficult. So, do you reckon there needs to be, and this is going to be Quite an ignorant question on my end because I don't know a lot about regulation in football. But do you reckon there needs to be a new independent regulator for the EFL?
Not just for the EFL, I'd say the whole of English football. I just think the money at the top is way too much, and it could be distributed a lot better. I mean, the wage cap structure needs to be introduced where, like, if certain players are relegated, they obviously earn less money because I know that's written into a lot of teams' contracts as well, but it's never written in where they lose enough money for those clubs to still survive. You look at Luton, they can't really offload the players because they'll be on 40, 50,000 pound a week because they got promoted to the Premier League. But then there's not another Championship club or a bottom half Premiership club that will buy them and pay them those wages because they're not worth that. They just get these bonuses and these wild pay rises, and then they can't really move to anyone else. I don't really want to see like an MLS draft style where everyone's paid the same, and because then I think like all teams are at like a similar level, and it almost becomes like predictable. But something does need to happen because you look at we talked about obviously Ipswich in the Premier League and the bottom three teams in the Premier League being the promoted clubs. That's becoming more and more regular. They're spending a lot of money and still can't really compete. We played Wolves in the FA Cup last week, and Wolves are having a tough season, and they were brilliant. They were miles ahead of us. And you look at the talent they've got on the field. There's no one in our team that could like shift another player from the Wolves team, which isn't how it used to be, and it's not how. If you're like a top half Championship team, I think that some of your players should be able to go up into a Premier League team and either like I don't even think they'd make the bench at the Wolves team, and they're one of the worst teams in the league. So like that gap is just getting more and more. Well, it's just getting bigger, and it's becoming like to a point where no one can even catch it.
So, final question on this before we talk about who your next manager could be. In a perfect world, if Blackburn got promoted via the playoffs this year, would you be excited about going into the Premier League, especially knowing kind of like how difficult it is up there, the amount you have to spend to even compete in the Premiership? So, how would you feel about being back up there in the promised land of the Premier League?
Oh my god, that's a awful question. Of course, obviously, you'd be absolutely amazed to be in the Premier League. That's what football's all about. You want to be in the top league. You want to like be competing for promotion and playoffs. So I would never say no to that because unless you're trying to win everything, I don't really see the point. That's not the point of sport, really, is it? I mean, it's been that long since we've had any sort of pride in the club. I wouldn't even mind getting in the playoffs and giving it a good go and being like proud of us. I think I just want, and we don't really ask for much at Rovers. We don't ever expect us to. I mean, I think there's been seasons where we've expected to finish in the playoffs. I think that's like Rhodes and Gusted both scoring 20 goals, and there are seasons where you think, yeah, we should have done better that season. Last season with Smodic 33 goals, should we have done better? Probably. But I look at the squad this season, I never think, yeah, we should be up there. But there's other things you can do to make the club better and make the actual experience as a fan better. And we've not done that for so long that it's not that I don't care about promotion, I don't care about the on-pitch performance, but I just want us to take more pride in the off-the-field stuff. We've had so many like errors and typos and this is going to sound really petty, but I could list off all the things we've had. Like emails go out with the wrong like date and wrong like names. When we bought there was like a 5-game package at the end of last season, just after John Eustace got the manager, like the 5 home games, and they spelt his name wrong. That's like unforgivable for like the new manager to have his name spelt wrong. We had a moment last month when we signed Sanderson and Forshaw, and they were advertising the shirts on an email, and on the back of the shirt they had the SPL font, like the Scottish Premier League, and I was like, that's harder to attain than a than the Championship font. I wouldn't even know where to find the SBL font. So, and I mean, I think I say I was lucky enough to speak to the chief executive, Steve Waggett, in the summer. It wasn't a lucky situation, but I did sit down and speak to him. And it wasn't, I would never go in and say, we're rubbish on the field, you're not spending enough money. I just said the standards at the club have never been lower. And it's not that I want the players to be playing like tiki-taka football and beating everyone, but I just want everyone at the club to have like pride in the work. And just like there's little things that, like, after so long of the ownership and the standards being so low, that they don't even surprise you anymore. And that's really different when you see mistakes being made and you don't even get bothered. I think that's when it gets really, really sad.
If you can tell us, how did Waggett respond when you say that? Did it look as though he, if I can say this, he cared, as though he was trying to convince you that the club were putting effort in?
I mean, if you go to our YouTube channel, the video is up there of all the details of what I spoke to him about and his responses. Did he care? I wouldn't say so. No, a lot of the mistakes at the time that I highlighted to him, one of the best responses I got was, "There's this error here, there's this error there," and he said, "Well, if you tell us, we'll change it." And I was like, "Well, that's not really our job as a fan. I don't like really look on Twitter and send an email to Rovers say you've made a typo in this or you've made an error. That's not our job, and that's not something the fan should have to do." I mean, there's little things like in the club shop, they're still selling Sam Gallagher shirt coasters. I mean, he left in the summer, and it's like last season's kit. And I just think, would any other football club like have those standards? Where they just, yeah, it'd be right. And yeah, it didn't. There was a lot of things where I suggested like the match day experience is really bad, like the halftime shows, and his basically whole attitude was write it down and send it to us. Now, we've tried that approach this season. We tried to do a pre-match display versus Burnley because we knew the Blackburn end had sold out for the Burnley game. So we'd arranged for the creation of a banner. We'd arranged for the, what they call, almost like cards to hold up to like make the display. Because it was the first home game of our 30th anniversary of winning a league, we had like a Premier League title, 1995 on blue and white halves, and a banner to show like the Burnley fans. And it would have looked amazing. I think like priced up. We had the studio. Well, one of our friends from the 4,000 Holes podcast offered his art studio up in Manchester to go and paint the banner. We had everything sorted out, and then we asked them for a bit of help, like the crowdfunding, and to like raise some like awareness of it so people could help out. And they said no. Yeah, and I just don't really think they're interested. That's the saddest thing. It's not the on the field stuff. It's not John Eustace. They're just not really interested in running a football club anymore.
And what do you think? Because this sounds like a really bizarre question, but I was going to ask, what do you think needs to be done for them to care? But that's quite a daft question, really. How much longer do you reckon this could last for? How much longer do you reckon they could stay at the club, putting in the amount of effort they're currently putting in, which is literally minimal, nothing? So how long do you reckon this could carry on for?
I'd say a guess another year, because we're losing £20 million a year, like on operating cost. We can't sell any more talent. Like we made a profit last season because we sold Adam Wharton. This season we sold Smodic. We got a bit of Raya seller money. We've kind of cut costs enough that we can probably make it under the £20 million mark to make a profit. The season after, I don't see who we sell to make £20 million. Callum Britton maybe could like bring you 5-6 million. Travis, but he's in the last year of his contract, so you're probably looking at 2-3 million at most. Is there anyone else you look at the Blackburn squad that you think anyone would be interested in?
Not really. I think in the summer you let go of quite a few of the like Schmodix, for example, who obviously went to Ipswich.
Yeah.
Dolan, but you said that he's on the last year of his contract, isn't he?
Yeah,
So
so Dolan's
it's
contract
difficult, really.
expires in the summer, so I think a lot of people are now linking him with Derby because Eustace has gone there and he spoke so highly of him. So yeah, I could see it being another year. There's talks of the academy being downgraded in the summer, which I think should be the final straw for a lot of fans to start like seriously protesting, because that's one thing that we've always been so proud of at Blackburn Rovers. Our academy's been like amazing. We produced so many talents for the last like 25 years and even longer. But yeah, as soon as that gets downgraded, because I think it costs them at the minute like £4 million a year to run it with the staff and the academy actual grounds and facilities. But yeah, as soon as they downgrade that to try and save money, I think that'll be the final straw.
And you would have thought, especially given how many brilliant players your academy has produced, Wharton being a brilliant example of a more recent graduate, that your academy would be their priorities. But it just comes to show how absolutely abysmally the club is being run when they're thinking about downgrading it. Let's move on to the managerial odds because Lee Carsley is currently favourites for the job. He is 11-4 to take over. Gary O'Neill is 7-2 to take over as well. Richie Wellens is in the running as well. He is 5-1. And your current caretaker, David Lowe, he is 6-1. So before I ask you about all of the names that I've just read out there, David Lowe, if he became the manager, what would you make of that? Because he knows the club quite well. Do you reckon he'd be a good appointment?
He's a really good coach. Would he be a good manager? I'm not 100%. It's really hard to go from that coaching players one-to-one individual basis where you're almost like a friend to them as well. Like you to then go into like management and leaving people out the tip. Like he's the one in the training ground where if someone needs an arm around the shoulder or someone's not out of the team, he'll go talk to them and explain it to them. And he like when you're the person then leaving them out the team, it's really hard to then balance that. So I think that jump up from coach to manager is, especially for someone that's been there for so long and like has been in like the background for so long. I just think it's too big of a jump, and if it goes wrong and he has to be sacked, he's never going to go back to being a coach at the club. So for me, he would stay as like the first team coach, and we'd get another manager in that obviously would rely on his experience and his actual knowledge of the team for the rest of the season. Who that manager is, I have not a Scooby Doo.
So, Lee Carsley, who we all know from England, Gary O'Neill, who recently departed from Wolves, and Richie Wellens, they are the current three favourites to take over. Um, do you reckon, because Gary O'Neill and Lee Carsley, they're both quite high profile managers, am I being cynical for suggesting that Blackburn in its current state might be a difficult pull for them? Or do you reckon that they'll be up for the challenge given how well you guys have done this season?
I'd say it's a difficult pull in the fact that we probably can't afford him. Like Gary O'Neill last job at Wolves, it'd have been on a lot more money than what Eustace would have been on. Lee Carsley last job at England, or like temporary job at England, I'm sure he'd have got a fair whack for that. It depends what the offer is. Is it you're the manager for the next 14 games, get us in the playoffs, see what you do, and we'll discuss it in the summer? But then you probably rule out a lot of people who want to build something and have that stability long term. There's not really many short term managers anymore. I think like back to like the famous name like Sam Allardyce, Neil Warnock, who are like people that just come in and do the job like the end part of the season. You don't really see many managers like that anymore. And those sort of managers that come in to do like an end of season job usually demand a lot of money, and we don't have that. So the names that you've mentioned as like favourites in the betting market, I can't see Carsley, I can't see O'Neill just because of financial reasons. I can't see anyone that's currently in a job because we won't pay the compensation. My biggest fear is that it's going to be Artur Karanka.
He's been
Just
linked.
yeah, and it's just because he signed Rudy Gestedt whilst he was at Middlesbrough from Villa, and Rudy Gestedt is our head of football operations and done a lot of recruitment this year. I just worry that something's in the air there, and I don't even want to think about it because it just terrifies me that Rudy Gestedt's picking our next manager, and two, it's someone that's been out of work and the last couple of jobs haven't really been that successful.
So, judging by Twitter, Rudy Gestede has had a mixed reception in his current role at Blackburn. How do you think he's been performing? Because I read earlier on, and this might be quite an ignorant view, that he hasn't really had much to do. So, what do you make of Rudy Gestede in his position at the moment?
Yeah, it's hard to judge because, like you said, he's not really had much to do. The problem with me again is the words that he's used. So he posted on LinkedIn because he was like the head of football operations. He'd supervised under Steve Waggett last year to like get some experience. Never really had any experience in like the managerial side of football before, like in terms of like off-field managerial stuff. So he'd supervised under Steve Waggett and was now going into head of football operations. So he does all the staff people on the footballing side. He does the actual players and now I'm guessing managers as well. We were looking for a chief scout after John Park left in November, which was strange, having a chief scout leave just before the January transfer window. We've then gone into the window. In the summer, we signed Todd Cantwell, who was signed for Rangers by John Park. I'm trying to like remember all the names here. I need like a map on the wall. So John Park signed him. We then had this window just gone. We signed Eustace, who was linked to us last summer. So that's obviously a John Park scouting method that's found him. Dion Sanderson, who I think has like Eustace links with the Birmingham captaincy and stuff. Emmanuel Dennis, I think, could just be like a throw your name in there. Is he all right? Is he available? Coley Woodrow, not really that inspirational. And then we signed Adam Forshaw on a free. Now, Adam Forshaw was struggling to get a game at Plymouth, and I know they've done well recently. Probably since he left, they've had an actual good upturn of form. But he was at Plymouth, couldn't get a game. His first interview, he said, "I kept in touch with Rudy since we were together at Middlesbrough, and I wanted to move closer to home." Now, that's not a reason to sign someone, especially when you're sixth in the Championship and pushing for playoffs. We're not here to do people favours. We're not here to like make your mates happy. We're actually like a professional football club. Now, on LinkedIn, when we're looking for a new chief scout, he said that he was looking for people to join his data-driven approach to recruitment. Now, the data-driven approach suggests that these players will have good data. That's how I read it. Cargbo scored 2 goals in 12 games in Serie B. When you look at his expected goals, it is underperformed. Emmanuel Dennis, the data was good 3 years ago in the Premier League. Not really done anything else. Coley Woodrow, he had a great season at Barnsley, but every other season he's been below average. Who else have we signed? I mean, Dion Sanderson couldn't get a game at Birmingham, and I know that we talked a lot about pre-show about how much money they've spent, and you can kind of understand why he wasn't in the team. But it's not. It doesn't shout data-driven approach to me. And a lot of the people we've linked with, I think we got linked with Patrick Bamford halfway through the window, and he's statistically the worst striker in Europe at finishing chances. And I was like, how can you be driven on data and be linked with a player like him? But then I realised that he played with Rudy Gestede at Middlesbrough, so it all starts to like make sense. I think he's just scrolling through his phone contacts and saying, "Are you still available? Are you still playing? Like, what are you up to?" You know, like if you've ever been like part of a Sunday League team, you know when you get to like Saturday night, you've only got 8 players, and you start texting people from like 5 years ago, like, "Do you fancy a game tomorrow? Fancy?" I think that's Rudy Gested's approach to recruitment.
So was Rudy Gestede the cheap option here? Because I think any other football club would hire a head of football who had previously been a head of football at another championship club. So, do you reckon he was just the easy, cheap option, especially given his roots to the club?
Cheap option and a yes man, I would say, because Steve Waggett gave him the opportunity to shadow him. I think he will then not go against Steve Waggett. We had Greg Broughton, who was at Bordeaux Glimt, who had done like really good transfers for us. But he'd also had some like failed transfers. We had like the Duncan Maguire fiasco and Lewis O'Brien fiasco as well. And in his first January, we were second going into the World Cup. I think we played Burnley away. We got beat, but if we'd have won that game, we'd have gone top of the league going into the World Cup break. That window, we signed Sorba Thomas on loan, who's an all right championship player, but second in the league, that should not be your only signing in a January. Now, whether that was down to Greg Broughton or the people above him, the finances, no one will ever know. It'll never come out probably. But it's constant like repeating itself of these failed transfer windows. And I think Greg Broughton eventually got fed up of it or said the wrong things and got sacked. Rudy Gestede had never been in that position where he'd say the wrong things and get sacked, I don't think.
Which again, like, is absolutely abysmal because he was a brilliant former player in the Championship at Middlesbrough, at Blackburn, all the other clubs he had been at. But you want somebody who's previously been, as I just said, a head of football to really take over at the position. And again, there's obviously a lack of care as well. Now, 5 years, and again, I know I asked you a similar question from now, but where do you see the club being in 5 years' time?
Oh my god. I don't even know where we'll be in 5 days' time, no man, 5 years' time. 5 years' time, we could be absolutely anywhere. I honestly couldn't tell you. We could be, if the next 14 plus 3, 17 games go really well, we could be in the Premier League, spending loads of money on players, or we could be in League Two, like begging people to like fund the club to keep going. I think we're just taking it a season at a time at the minute, just to make sure that we are surviving. But yeah, that's like a really like negative way and downtrodden way to look at it. But 5 years' time is a long time under Venky's. If you look at like the first 2 years since when they took over, we went from a really established Premier League club to a really poorly run Championship club. It's like, if they can do that in 2 years, who knows what they can do in 5 years.
And finally, before we do wrap up, you see a lot of talk in the newspaper about, again, I've just mentioned, but the likes of Reading, for example, and other teams like Sheffield Wednesday who have really abysmal ownership of their own. Do you reckon the media give Blackburn enough attention in regards to just how bad your ownership is? Do you reckon more attention needs to be put on it so something could hopefully be done?
I mean, it's hard to ask, isn't it? Because the media just, I mean, I know like we've got the Football League podcast, and it for the people that are like involved in it, like the Football League's like an amazing product. The media in this country, especially, don't really focus on it. It's all about like how Man United are doing and like the Jim Ratcliffe and his decisions, and everyone else just seems to be forgotten about. Sheffield Wednesday, obviously, like massive club, massive attendances, so their protests are more noticeable. Reading, I think, like a similar situation to us. I just think their protests have been more pronounced. Like, I know they've done like the tennis ball protest, but they also had I can't think who the opposition was, where they actually went onto the pitch and stopped the game from being played. That's the only logical step where the EFL and the FA actually start getting involved, because you're affecting other clubs and you're affecting the fixture schedule and you're affecting the fans of other clubs that are travelling. something that we suggested in like fan groups. Like obviously we play Plymouth Saturday. That's a terrible away trip if after 15 minutes people went onto the pitch to cancel the game. But we're fifth in the league. Do you really get the benefit of the doubt from the media if you start doing that? I'm not 100% sure. Do I want more media? Yeah, but a lot of people just don't understand. So I don't want people like, I think we've seen recently, like Danny Murphy and Paul Robinson's come out a little bit and spoke about it. Just making like odd remarks about it isn't enough. Like people need to actually like, it's like Henry Wright is a great example. He's like written about us for quite a number of years, like the ownership and stuff, and he wrote a really long post on Twitter. That's the kind of media attention you need. People actually understand what's gone on in the past and the whole 15 years, and to like summarize it for the majority of people. What I don't want is people to go, oh well, that's a bit weird, but Venky's are doing at Blackburn, and that be it, because that's nothing. Like people don't really understand that, and just by saying little snippets and little clickbait headlines, I don't think people really get the full story and understand why we are so upset that we're in this situation.
And what has the local media said about Venky's and the situation? Does the local media give it much attention?
I think they did, like in the initial like couple of years. I think again we've just got used to it. It's almost become like this is the norm for us. So like if anything else goes wrong, it's not really like a big thing. It doesn't really get discussed. Elliot Jackson, who's the current Lancashire Telegraph reporter for the club, he's become more vocal recently. He's got a podcast called RT at Labor, where he talks like all things Rovers, and it's really like he's really passionate about the club. I don't want to say now, because obviously I think he was just getting used to things when he first came into that position, but he's a Sheffield Wednesday fan. So to hear a fan of another club speak so passionately about how bad the club's being run, and I feel like since this January, where Eustace didn't get the backing and he's obviously now left, there's been like a massive switch in attitude in his reporting. A couple of articles about the and like the words and like the tone of voice he's using in the podcast. One of his articles yesterday led with a picture of the fans saying, like with like a banner saying Venky's out. So even like small things like that makes a massive difference in building that momentum for like the protests and people's attitude towards the owners. So like the local media are getting better, but again, it's nationally, will people notice that, like, or is it just us? Like, is it just us Rovers fans that see it?
And finally, before we do a wrap up, of course, at the moment you're doing very well in the Premier League. You're in the playoffs. You're fifth. How do you see yourselves finishing this season? Because you're in a bizarre situation at the moment. You're managerless, but you beat West Bromwich Albion 2-0 last time. So how do you see yourselves finishing the season?
I'd love to say we get in the playoffs. You know what? I'm going to say it. I think we finish in the playoffs. It'd be typical Blackburn Rovers. Like, no one expects us to do well. No one expects us to stay in there. I think we finish fifth, and I think what even goes far as saying we beat Sunderland in the semis and then get beat in the final, maybe. But yeah, it'd be typical Blackburn Rovers to go to Wembley without a manager and win the playoffs. That'd sum up the last 15 years where everything you expect to happen, the opposite happens. So yeah, we're going to finish fifth.
And finally, before I wrap up the show, remind people again where they can find the Kidder Street Noise on YouTube, on Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So where can people find you? And on social media as well.
Yeah, so probably the best place to find us is on Twitter at Kidder Street Noise. You'll see the link to YouTube on there. We'll always post like our audio podcast, which comes through the 4,000 Holes show. And it's like a really complicated setup at the minute. But yeah, you'll always see our retweets and our links to the shows through there. The YouTube channel link is on there as well. And if you search for us on TikTok, Kidder Street Noise, we're uploading a lot more content on there as well. So yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely perfect. And of course, you can find Over the Bar on Twitter at Over the Bar FB. I always forget the plugs. On Instagram at Over the Bar as well. And of course, on YouTube. If you type Over the Bar in on YouTube, we will be the first show that will pop up. And thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciated having you on. And thank you very much to everybody who has tuned in as well. We will see you all next week.